Tonight we follow a river that never sleeps, through shadows of gods and farmers, where history whispers softly, and endings feel like beginnings if you listen long enough in silence. Before you drift any deeper, if this quiet helps you feel safe tonight, you're welcome to stay with us. Subscribing softly keeps this place gentle and lets these nights continue. Now, rest. And as you settle into that stillness, let the world slow just enough to notice what has always been there. Before Egypt wakes, before doors creak open and sandals scrape against stone, before anyone thinks about gods, taxes, or breakfast, the Nile is already awake. It has been awake for hours, possibly for centuries. Dawn in the year 300 AD arrives quietly along the river, not with drama, not with trumpets, but with a slow light that seems unsure whether it wants to stay. A pale horizon stretches across the water, soft and gray, as if the sun itself is still debating the effort. Mist floats low above the surface, thin and patient, blurring the line between river and sky. The Nile does not rush. It never has. It moves the way something ancient moves, unbothered, unhurried, confident that time will eventually come to it instead. Wooden boats rest along the banks, tied loosely, rocking just enough to remind you that the water beneath them is alive. Their hulls are scarred, darkened by years of use, patched and repaired more times than anyone remembers. They have carried grain, people, animals, and occasionally hope, though hope tends to leak out faster than water seeps in. Oars lie still, untouched, waiting for hands that have not yet woken. The river does not wait with them. It continues to slide south to north, as it always has, a long, slow sentence with no interest in punctuation. If history were listening closely, it might realize the Nile is not telling a story. It is simply continuing one. The air is cool, briefly forgiving, before the sun remembers where it is and what it is supposed to do. Birds call softly from the reeds, not singing so much as checking in with the morning. Somewhere far off, a splash breaks the surface, then disappears, as if even sound knows better than to linger too long. This is not a dramatic moment. That is the point. Empires prefer drama. Rivers prefer routine. The Nile has watched enough beginnings to know they rarely mean much on their own. In the year 300 AD, Egypt is old. Not metaphorically old, but genuinely, deeply, inconveniently old. Civilizations have risen, flourished, and quietly misplaced themselves along this river long before the idea of Rome ever crossed a mind. Yet the Nile shows no visible sign of pride about this. It does not mark anniversaries. It does not reminisce. It simply flows, carrying silt, memory, and the faint impression that everything else is temporary. The water reflects the early light without comment, as if to say that reflections are not the same as understanding. Humans, of course, believe they understand it. They always have. Standing on the riverbank, looking at the slow, obedient movement of water, it is easy to think control is possible. Channels are dug, dikes are built, measurements are taken, calendars are shaped around floods that arrive with reassuring regularity until they don't. From a distance, the Nile looks cooperative, even polite. It floods when expected, retreats when told, leaves behind rich soil like a gift. People nod approvingly at this arrangement, convinced it proves something about their intelligence. The Nile, meanwhile, continues doing what it was going to do anyway. Mist curls and thins as the light grows stronger, revealing more of the river's surface, wide and indifferent. It does not acknowledge borders. It does not care who rules Egypt this decade or which language is used to issue commands that will never reach the water. Pharaohs once claimed divine authority over it. Roman administrators now file reports about it. Neither has ever managed to make it nervous. The river has outlasted gods with official temples and emperors with official titles. It has learned patience the way humans learn habits. There is something unsettling about a thing that does not need you. The Nile does not rely on belief or tribute or prayers whispered at dawn. It does not require respect, though it often receives it, sometimes desperately. If every settlement along its banks vanished overnight, the river would still rise with the rains, still spill over its edges, still carry silt northward, like it always has. It does not pause to mourn. It does not notice absence the way people do. This is not cruelty. It is simply scale. As the sun climbs higher, the water darkens into deeper blues and greens, its surface smoothing out as the mist fades. Light dances briefly, then settles, as if even brightness knows better than to overstay its welcome. Somewhere beyond the river, Egypt begins to stir. A door opens. A voice clears its throat. A day is about to begin, full of effort and repetition and quiet expectations. None of this registers with the Nile. It has already seen days like this arrive and leave thousands of times. It has seen better ones. It has seen worse. It does not keep score. The irony, of course, is that everyone believes the opposite. Farmers will wake soon and look at the river with calculation in their eyes, wondering if this year will be kind. Officials will check levels, record numbers, and pretend those numbers mean certainty. Priests will thank the gods for its generosity, carefully avoiding the subject of what happens when generosity runs out. Everyone will act as though the Nile is participating in their plans. The river, meanwhile, will continue its slow, quiet work, unmoved by gratitude or blame. If the Nile could speak, which it does not bother to do, it might respond to humanity's confidence with something polite and brief. Yes, of course, you control the floods. You understand the currents. You have mastered the rhythm of a river that was ancient before your ancestors learned how to count. Keep believing that. It seems to help you sleep. The water would say this without sarcasm, because sarcasm requires effort, and the Nile does not waste energy on things that do not matter. As morning fully arrives, the illusion settles in. Egypt wakes, convinced the day belongs to it. The river allows this belief, the way an adult allows a child to think they are steering the boat. Long before the first foot touches the bank, long before the first command is spoken, the Nile has already been awake for thousands of years, flowing steadily through history, waiting patiently for humanity to catch up, or more likely, to pass by. Farmers, mud, and inexpensive dreams. When the sun climbs higher over the Nile, Egypt begins to move, not with urgency, not with ambition, but with a practiced heaviness that comes from doing the same thing for generations without expecting applause. Along the riverbanks, farmers wake, not because they are inspired, but because daylight leaves them little choice. Their homes, made of mud brick and patience, release them slowly into the morning. Doors open. Feet step into damp earth. Hands reach for tools, worn smooth by decades of use and centuries of design that no one bothers to improve, because improvement implies hope for something different. A farmer's day in 300 AD begins exactly where yesterday ended, at the edge of the field, staring at soil that looks the same every morning and somehow decides everything. The mud is dark and rich, fed by the Nile's yearly generosity, clinging to ankles with quiet determination. It is the kind of mud that promises life while simultaneously trying to pull you under. The farmer greets it with familiarity, not affection. There is no romance here, only calculation. Is it too wet? Is it too dry? Has the river been kind this year? Or is it feeling creative? They bend, plant, cut, and carry with movements that require no thought. Bodies remember what minds no longer question. Seeds are pressed into the earth with fingers that have done this since childhood, guided by fathers who learned from their fathers, who learned from men whose names were never recorded. History does not remember these hands. The Nile does. It feeds them just enough to keep the cycle intact and not enough to make it interesting. The sun rises steadily, erasing any illusion that the day might be gentle. Heat settles over the fields like an unspoken rule. Sweat darkens linen tunics. Breathing becomes heavier, slower, as if the air itself is resisting effort. Yet the work continues, because stopping would require a reason, and survival is reason enough. Crops grow or fail based on decisions made far upstream, far beyond the farmer's control, by rain that falls in lands they will never see. This is understood, accepted, and quietly resented. There is no talk of destiny here, only outcomes. A good flood means grain. A bad flood means hunger. A perfect flood, which everyone talks about and no one remembers clearly, means enough to eat and enough to give away to someone else with a louder voice. The farmer's greatest dream is not wealth or land or escape. It is consistency, that the water rises, then falls, not too fast, not too slow, that the crop grows evenly, that nothing unexpected happens. This is ambition reduced to its most practical form. By midday, the rhythm of work becomes mechanical. Backs ache in familiar ways. Hands blister where old blisters once were. The mind drifts, not toward fantasy, but toward counting. How much grain might this field produce? How much will be taken? How much will remain? These calculations are done silently, because saying them out loud would not change the answer. The presence of tax collectors is felt long before they appear, like a shadow that moves faster than the body casting it. Taxes are not discussed as policy, they are discussed as weather, something that arrives, something that cannot be argued with. Officials will come later, measuring, recording, and reminding everyone who truly benefits from the Nile's generosity. They will wear cleaner clothes, speak in practiced tones, and act as though this system exists for order, not extraction. The farmer will nod, agree, and hand over a portion of the harvest with the same resignation used to accept a dry season. The irony is almost elegant. The people who work closest to the river, whose lives depend most directly on its moods, benefit from it the least. Grain moves away from the fields, up the social ladder into storage rooms, markets, and ships, bound for places where the Nile is admired rather than endured. The farmer watches this happen year after year, aware enough to notice, not foolish enough to protest. Protesting requires energy better spent on staying alive. Afternoons stretch long and unremarkable. Time does not speed up or slow down here. It simply accumulates. Children carry water. Older farmers offer advice that sounds suspiciously like complaint. Conversations drift toward the same topics they always do. Last year's flood, this year's worry, next year's uncertainty. Laughter appears occasionally, dry and brief, often aimed at the absurdity of pretending anything will change. Humor survives here not as joy, but as defense. There are moments rare and fleeting when a farmer pauses and looks at the river, shimmering under the sun, and feels something close to awe, the sheer size of it, the certainty of its movement. Then the feeling passes, replaced by the more pressing concern of finishing the day's work before the light shifts. Awe is a luxury for people who have time. Farmers have tasks. As evening approaches, the fields empty slowly. Tools are gathered, loads are carried home. The body moves on memory alone, each step echoing thousands taken before. Home offers little comfort beyond shade and the promise of rest. Meals are simple, measured carefully, eaten without ceremony. Grain is precious, not because it is rare, but because it is temporary. What is not eaten today must last through tomorrow and the next season and whatever the river decides to do next. Dreams, when they come, are modest. No one dreams of becoming someone else. They dream of surviving as themselves, but with fewer surprises, a stable flood, a harvest that matches expectations, a tax collector who measures generously. These are the fantasies that fill the quiet moments before sleep. They are small enough to feel reasonable, which makes their failure easier to endure. Night settles over the farms with a heavy calm. Bodies collapse into rest. Muscles loosen reluctantly. Tomorrow is already planned, because tomorrow is identical. This repetition is not boring to those who live it. It is reassuring. Change is what frightens people who depend on water behaving predictably. The Nile, for all its power, has taught them that much. And so, as darkness deepens and the river continues its slow, indifferent journey, Egypt runs on the labor of those who ask for very little and receive slightly less. The farmers sleep, preparing to wake again with the sun, to step once more into mud that feels like fate beneath their feet. When the sun rises high enough to burn away the last traces of mist, Egypt will be fully awake, its machinery turning steadily, slowly, reliably, just as it has for centuries. When the sun rises higher, Egypt begins to function, not loudly, not proudly, but with a quiet certainty built on repetition, endurance, and the simple hope that this year the river will not ask for too much. Cities, officials, and those who never touch the fields. By the time the sun has fully risen and burned away the softness of the morning, Egypt's cities begin to assert themselves, standing apart from the fields like carefully arranged arguments. Stone replaces mud. Straight streets replace winding paths. Walls rise not to keep nature out, but to remind people where they belong. In the year 300 AD, urban Egypt lives under Roman administration, though it still wears the face of something older, something that refuses to fully disappear. Columns carry Greek inscriptions. Statues stare with borrowed authority. Bureaucracy hums quietly in the background, the true engine of empire. The city wakes later than the farms, but it believes itself more important. Officials emerge from shaded courtyards and private rooms, adjusting robes that have never known soil. Sandals step onto clean stone, not mud. Hands that will spend the day holding styluses and scrolls remain uncalloused, carefully preserved for tasks considered more valuable than feeding the country. These are the people who keep records, who measure, who define what order looks like on paper. They move with the confidence of those who believe the world responds to ink. Markets open, but not with the urgency of hunger. Goods arrive from the countryside, transformed by distance into abstractions. Grain becomes numbers, oil becomes units, livestock becomes tax assessments. The connection between effort and reward thins as it moves inward, diluted by layers of administration. In the city, food is discussed in terms of supply and distribution, not seasons and survival. The Nile is present here too, flowing past docks and warehouses, but it feels more managed, more civilized, as if stone embankments might convince it to behave. Roman authority expresses itself through routine. Documents are stamped, lists are updated, messengers carry instructions that sound decisive and feel permanent. Offices fill with the quiet scratch of writing, the soft murmur of discussions about efficiency and compliance. The language of control is calm, precise, and deeply reassuring to those who use it. Problems become issues. Hunger becomes shortage. People become figures that fit neatly into columns. From this distance, everything appears solvable. Tax collection is the city's most important conversation, though it rarely calls itself that. Officials speak instead of balance, obligation, and fairness, words chosen carefully to avoid the physical reality behind them. Assessments are made based on reports sent from the countryside, reports written by men who rarely leave their desks. Numbers are debated, adjusted, finalized. Once written, they acquire authority, as if the act of recording them transforms guesswork into truth. Somewhere far away, a farmer will feel the weight of that truth without ever seeing the hand that wrote it. There is a confidence that comes from not having to prove usefulness daily. City officials possess it effortlessly. They talk about order as if it were a natural state, something that emerges when the right people are in charge. Order, in their view, is clean streets, predictable revenue, and quiet compliance. The fact that this order rests on the strained backs of people they will never meet is not ignored so much as considered irrelevant. Systems, after all, require input. They do not concern themselves with how that input feels. The gap between the people who write and the people who dig is wide and carefully maintained. It is reinforced by education, by language, by the physical separation between city and field. Literacy itself becomes a quiet form of power. To write is to define. To record is to decide what matters. The farmer's labor feeds the city, but the city's words govern the farmer. This imbalance feels natural to those at the top, because they have always experienced it that way. There is mild irony in how seriously officials take their own fragility. Meetings are held to discuss stability, guards are posted to ensure peace, laws are repeated to remind everyone that order exists. All of this is done to protect a structure that would collapse within weeks if the countryside stopped working. Yet the countryside is rarely mentioned except as a resource. The city sees itself as the mind of Egypt, not noticing that a mind without a body does not last long. Religion finds a comfortable place in the urban landscape, reshaped to fit imperial needs. Temples still stand, incense still burns, and rituals continue, though their meanings blur. Roman gods share space with Egyptian ones, and everyone pretends this is harmony rather than compromise. Faith becomes another administrative category, regulated but respected, useful for calming people who might otherwise ask difficult questions. Belief, like grain, flows inward and is redistributed in more controlled forms. Citizens of the city benefit from distance. Hunger here is rarely immediate. When shortages occur, they are discussed, planned around, softened by reserves taken from elsewhere. Comfort exists in layers, insulating people from the sharp edges of survival. Even anxiety feels different here, more abstract. Worries focus on policy changes, political shifts, or the favor of distant authorities. The river's unpredictability feels less personal when it is filtered through reports. And yet, beneath the stone and order, there is unease. Empires always sense their own dependence, even when they refuse to admit it. Officials know, on some level, that their power exists only as long as the flow continues of goods, of labor, of belief. This knowledge expresses itself in control. More records, more measurements, more emphasis on rules. Order becomes something to be enforced constantly because it does not sustain itself. There is a subtle humor in how earnestly the city believes in its permanence. Buildings are constructed to last. Laws are written as if they will be read forever. Titles are handed down with the assumption that they will always matter. The Nile flows past all of this, unchanged, carrying reminders of earlier cities that once shared the same confidence. None of them are still issuing tax assessments. As afternoon settles into evening, the city slows. Officials finish their work, satisfied that order has been maintained for another day. Scrolls are stored, doors are closed, the system rests, confident it will resume in the morning exactly as it left off. Somewhere beyond the walls, farmers prepare for sleep, bodies heavy with work, minds lightened only by exhaustion. The connection between these two worlds remains invisible to those who benefit most from it. The city believes it runs Egypt. In reality, it manages the illusion that it does. Bread arrives, taxes are paid, reports are filed, everything appears stable. This stability is praised, defended, and carefully protected by people who never step into the fields that make it possible. They speak of order with reverence, rarely acknowledging that it is built from lives spent repeating the same motions under the sun. As night approaches and lamps are lit, Egypt's urban heart settles into quiet reflection. Conversations turn toward philosophy, law, and the nature of authority. These discussions feel elevated, important, detached from mud and sweat. Yet even here, beneath the calm voices and measured thoughts, there is an unspoken understanding that Egypt does not live on bread alone. It lives on something less tangible, something that convinces farmers to keep planting, officials to keep recording, and everyone to accept their place in a system older than any one of them. Egypt survives not just on grain and order, but on belief, carefully maintained, quietly shared, and rarely questioned. Gods, temples, and the cats who were treated better than people. As belief settles into the quiet spaces left by bread and order, Egypt's temples continue their slow, deliberate breathing, unchanged in spirit even as the world around them shifts. In the year 300 AD, faith in Egypt is not a single voice but a layered echo built from centuries of devotion, adaptation, and selective forgetting. The gods are still here. They have been here far longer than Rome, and despite Rome's best efforts to reorganize the universe, they are not especially interested in leaving. Temples rise along the Nile and within the cities, their walls thick with carvings that speak of creation, judgment, and eternity, concepts that feel reassuringly stable in a world governed by taxes and uncertainty. Inside these temples, rituals unfold with careful precision. Priests move slowly, deliberately, as if speed itself might offend something unseen. Incense curls upward in thin, perfumed lines, carrying prayers that have been repeated so often they no longer sound like requests, but like habits. Words are spoken in ancient languages that fewer people understand, though understanding has never been the point. Faith here is less about comprehension and more about continuity. The gods do not need to be explained, they need to be remembered. Egyptian religion at this time is crowded. Old gods remain firmly rooted, occupying their niches with stubborn dignity. Osiris still governs the afterlife, weighing hearts against feathers with the patience of someone who has done this job for millennia. Isis continues to protect, to heal, to gather broken pieces and make them whole again. Ra still journeys across the sky, rising and falling with reliable drama. New gods arrive as well, imported by Rome and Greece, bringing unfamiliar names and different aesthetics. Instead of conflict, there is accommodation. If a god proves useful, Egypt finds room. Rome, pragmatic as always, understands that removing gods is far more difficult than taxing grain, so it does not try too hard. Instead, it allows syncretism, blending identities, merging divine portfolios like administrative departments. A Roman god becomes an aspect of an Egyptian one. An Egyptian god gains a new title in Greek. Everyone pretends this is unity rather than convenience. The temples remain busy because belief, unlike politics, cannot be replaced overnight. For the average person, religion is not a philosophical debate. It is insurance. Prayers are offered for good floods, healthy children, protection from illness, and favorable judgment after death. The gods are approached not as abstract ideals, but as powerful neighbors who must be acknowledged regularly to avoid unpleasant attention. Neglecting a god feels risky. Respecting one feels sensible. In this way, faith becomes part of daily maintenance, like repairing a roof or storing grain. Animals occupy a curious place in this system, none more so than cats. Cats are not merely companions or pest control, though they do that efficiently. They are sacred, associated with Bastet, a goddess of protection, fertility, and controlled chaos. In temples dedicated to her, cats move freely, indifferent to human reverence. They are fed, protected, and admired, their presence treated as a blessing. When a cat dies, it may be mourned, embalmed, and buried with care. Its afterlife is considered important. This reverence creates a quiet, uncomfortable contrast. Human lives, especially poor ones, do not always receive the same attention. A farmer may die and be buried quickly, without ceremony, without preservation. A cat, however, might be carefully wrapped, placed in a small coffin, and given offerings. This is not cruelty so much as priority. The divine association matters more than the social one. It is a system that makes sense internally, even if it appears strange from the outside. Temples employ entire economies. Priests, scribes, caretakers, animal keepers, and artisans all depend on the continued relevance of the gods. Offerings flow in, redistributed as wages, food, and influence. Faith sustains livelihoods just as surely as the Nile sustains crops. The line between spiritual devotion and practical survival is thin and intentionally blurred. To question the gods is not only dangerous to the soul, but inconvenient to the economy. At the same time, a subtle shift is underway. Christianity has begun to spread through Egypt, carried quietly along trade routes and whispered conversations. It does not arrive loudly. It does not overthrow temples overnight. It exists alongside older beliefs, offering a different promise, a different structure, a different understanding of death. For some, it is appealing precisely because it rejects the crowded pantheon, replacing it with a single God who claims exclusive attention. For others, it feels unnecessary. Why abandon gods who have worked for generations? This coexistence creates tension, though it is not always visible. Old temples continue their rituals, but attendance shifts. Some gods receive fewer offerings. Some festivals feel smaller. Priests notice even if they do not comment. Faith, like the Nile, responds to pressure slowly, but it does respond. Rome watches this development with cautious interest, aware that belief can either stabilize or disrupt order, depending on how it is handled. For most people, however, the gods remain close, personal, and practical. Amulets are worn. Small household shrines receive daily attention. Names of gods are invoked casually, woven into speech like punctuation. Faith does not require temples alone. It lives in gestures, habits, and quiet fears. The afterlife looms large, not as an abstract concept, but as an extension of life's accounting. What you do now matters later. The gods are watching, even when officials are not. The obsession with death is not morbid. It is logical. Life is uncertain. Death at least offers structure. The rituals surrounding burial, preservation, and judgment provide a sense of control over the one thing no one escapes. The careful preparation of bodies, human or animal, reflects a deep belief that existence does not end abruptly. It transitions, bureaucratically, into another phase. Forms must be filled. Standards must be met. There is a quiet humor in how busy death becomes in a culture so focused on preparing for it. Embalmers work steadily. Priests recite spells endlessly. Tombs are constructed, decorated, revisited. The dead require attention, offerings, and remembrance. In honoring them, the living reassure themselves that they will not be forgotten either. The system feeds itself, sustained by hope and fear in equal measure. As evening approaches, temple courtyards glow with torchlight. Prayers continue. Cats weave between legs, unimpressed by devotion. Somewhere, a poor family lights a small lamp and hopes the gods are listening. Somewhere else, a priest counts offerings and considers tomorrow's rituals. The gods remain patient and unmoving, accepting attention without explanation. And so belief fills the spaces that labor and order cannot. It explains suffering, justifies inequality, and promises meaning beyond exhaustion. It asks for loyalty, respect, and the occasional animal sacrifice, but it also offers comfort in a world shaped by forces no one controls. When the living devote themselves so fully to gods of the dead, death itself becomes crowded, organized, and constantly in demand. And in Egypt, as night deepens and the river continues its indifferent flow, the gods remain awake, listening, while humanity prepares for the judgment it has already imagined countless times. Death is not the end, but an investment. In Egypt, death is not treated as an interruption. It is treated as a continuation, a transition carefully managed, documented, and prepared for with the seriousness of a lifelong project. By the year 300 AD, this attitude has settled deeply into the culture, shaping how people live just as much as how they expect to die. Life along the Nile is uncertain, often harsh, and rarely forgiving, but death offers structure. Death promises rules. Death, unlike floods or taxes, follows a system that can be learned, planned for, and optimized, at least in theory. From an early age, Egyptians grow up knowing that their bodies matter long after breath leaves them. The soul, according to tradition, is not a single thing but a collection of parts, each with its own requirements. The body must remain intact. The name must be remembered. The heart must be judged. The afterlife is not automatic. It must be earned, navigated, and supported by the right preparations. Death, therefore, becomes an investment, one that begins quietly and grows more urgent with age. Mummification is the most visible expression of this belief, and also the most misunderstood. It is not performed out of fear alone, but out of confidence. Confidence that the self will continue. Confidence that preservation matters. Embalmers work with practiced efficiency, their methods refined over centuries. Organs are removed, treated, stored. The body is dried, wrapped, protected from decay, as if decay were merely an inconvenience rather than an inevitability. This process is expensive, time-consuming, and deeply symbolic. It declares that the person inside the wrappings expects to be needed again. For the wealthy, preparation for death can begin long before illness appears. Tombs are commissioned early, sometimes decades in advance. Walls are painted with scenes of abundance, pleasure, and continuity. Visual reminders to the soul of what awaits it. Texts are inscribed to guide the dead through the dangers of the afterlife, instructions for avoiding traps, monsters, and bureaucratic complications beyond the grave. The Book of the Dead, despite its ominous name, functions more like a manual, offering reassurance that with proper preparation, eternity is manageable. The poor, of course, approach death differently. Their investments are smaller, not by choice, but by necessity. Simple burials, fewer wrappings, limited offerings. Faith does not disappear, but its expression is constrained by resources. A poor person may trust the gods to fill in the gaps left by lack of preparation. A wealthy person trusts preparation to impress the gods. Both approaches carry the same quiet hope. That effort, in whatever form, will be recognized. This creates a subtle irony that no one speaks about openly. The rich spend fortunes ensuring a comfortable afterlife, while the poor rely on belief alone. Yet the final judgment, as described in myth, is strikingly egalitarian. Hearts are weighed against a feather, not wealth, not status, not the size of one's tomb. The system insists on fairness even if the living world does not. Whether this fairness is experienced or merely promised remains conveniently untestable. Death rituals are everywhere in Egypt, woven into daily awareness. Cemeteries lie close to settlements. Tombs are visited, maintained, and spoken to. The dead are not gone, they are relocated. Offerings of food and drink are made, not as symbolic gestures, but as necessities. The dead, it is believed, still require sustenance. Forgetting them is dangerous. Neglect is punished not only socially, but spiritually. This constant attention to death does not make life gloomy. If anything, it normalizes mortality to the point where fear becomes manageable. When death is expected, planned for, and ritualized, it loses some of its power to shock. People speak of it calmly, even practically. Accidents happen, illness comes, life ends. What matters is whether one has prepared correctly. In this way, anxiety shifts from dying to being unprepared, a problem that feels solvable. There is an entire industry built around this preparation. Embalmers, priests, artisans, coffin makers, and scribes all depend on the certainty that people will continue to die and want to do so properly. Death sustains livelihoods. It funds temples, it keeps traditions alive. The afterlife, while invisible, supports a very visible economy. No one finds this strange. It is simply how things are. Roman influence has not erased these practices. If anything, it has learned to coexist with them. Roman officials may not believe in Egyptian judgments of the soul, but they understand the value of not interfering. Death rituals keep people focused, compliant, and invested in a future that does not challenge present authority. A population busy preparing for eternity has little energy left to disrupt the present. There is quiet humor in the contrast between effort and outcome. The wealthy dead rest in elaborately decorated tombs surrounded by goods meant to last forever. The poor rest in simple graves, marked briefly, remembered mostly by family. Time treats both the same. Tombs decay. Names fade. Even the most carefully preserved body eventually yields to the slow work of nature. The Nile, flowing past burial grounds and forgotten monuments, carries no distinction between rich and poor remains. Still, the belief persists because belief is not sustained by evidence but by need. The idea that death is not an end but a continuation offers comfort in a life defined by labor and uncertainty. It suggests that effort is rewarded, if not here, then elsewhere. It makes suffering feel temporary, justified, part of a larger equation that will eventually balance itself. As the sun begins to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across fields, cities, and cemeteries alike, Egypt slows its pace. Work winds down. Temples prepare for evening rituals. Families gather, aware that each day completed is also one day closer to judgment. The river reflects the fading light, without comment, indifferent to preparation or belief. When the sun starts to sink, Egypt exhales. Another day has passed. Another small investment has been made in survival, in memory, in eternity. Death waits patiently, not as an enemy, but as an appointment that everyone knows is coming. And in preparing for it so carefully, Egypt finds a strange kind of peace, trusting that when the time comes, the transition will be orderly, meaningful, and ideally worth the effort. Dusk on the Nile, the hour of weariness. As the sun begins its slow descent toward the western horizon, Egypt enters the most honest hour of the day. This is not the hour of ambition, nor of belief, nor of carefully maintained order. This is the hour of fatigue. Work does not end suddenly. It loosens its grip gradually, reluctantly, as if unsure whether it should let go. Fields empty at an unhurried pace. Tools are gathered without ceremony. The last motions of labor are slower, heavier, shaped by bodies that have given all the precision they can afford. Along the Nile, the light changes first. The water, which reflected pale morning and harsh midday brightness, now deepens into darker tones. Blues thicken. Greens fade. The surface loses its sparkle and gains weight, as if the river itself is growing tired of being watched. The sun turns red, then softer, then almost embarrassed by how much attention it has demanded all day. Shadows stretch long across the banks, touching places that felt distant only hours ago. Families begin to reassemble, not dramatically, not joyfully, but with the quiet relief of people who have survived another cycle. Children return from carrying water or watching animals. Older hands release their grip on tools that will be picked up again tomorrow. There are no speeches about perseverance. No one celebrates endurance. It is simply acknowledged privately with a deeper breath and slower steps. Evening meals are simple, measured, and familiar. Bread, grain, perhaps vegetables, sometimes fish, if fortune allowed it earlier in the day. Food is not discussed as cuisine. It is discussed as enough or not enough. Eating happens in relative silence, punctuated by small exchanges, brief comments about the day that do not need elaboration. Everyone knows how the day was. They lived it together even when they were apart. The red sun lowers further, casting a muted glow over homes built from mud brick and habit. Smoke rises from small cooking fires, drifting upward before dissolving into the cooling air. The heat of the day loosens its hold, replaced by a brief moment of comfort that feels almost generous. This moment never lasts long. Everyone knows that. No one tries to extend it. In the cities, dusk arrives with a different texture, but the same exhaustion. Officials leave their offices, carrying with them the weight of decisions that felt important at the time and now feel distant. Markets close, voices soften, the sharp edges of authority blur as roles are temporarily set aside. For a few hours, the people who write and the people who dig share something close to equality. They are all tired. The Nile darkens steadily, absorbing the fading light without reflection. Boats that moved earlier now rest again, their outlines barely visible. The river becomes less of a presence and more of a suggestion, something felt rather than seen. It continues to move, of course, because it always does. But its movement becomes quieter, more private, as if it prefers not to draw attention at this hour. This is when the collective sigh happens, though no one names it. Egypt exhales, muscles relax, voices lower. The urgency that ruled the day dissolves into something heavier and slower. Time itself seems to thicken, stretching minutes into longer, softer spaces. People sit. They lean against walls. They allow themselves to feel the full weight of the day settle into their bones. Conversations at dusk are different. They are not about plans or calculations. They drift instead toward memory, complaint, and quiet humor. Someone mentions how hot it was. Someone else replies that it was hotter last year, or will be worse next year. Laughter appears briefly, not because anything is funny, but because humor is easier than despair and requires less explanation. This is the laughter of people who understand exactly what they are laughing at. The sky continues its transformation, moving from red to deep orange, then to a muted purple that feels almost intimate. Birds retreat into silence. Sounds soften. The world seems to pull inward, as if preparing for something unseen. Lamps are lit carefully, their flames small and deliberate, each one carving out a limited island of light. Darkness presses close, waiting politely. Children grow quieter. Elders settle into stillness. The body recognizes this hour instinctively. This is the boundary between effort and rest, between visibility and obscurity. It is not sleep yet. Sleep will come later with its own rules and dangers. Dusk is the pause, the space where thought slows and awareness drifts. There is something deeply human about this time. Gods feel distant. Authority feels less rigid. Even death, so carefully prepared for, feels less immediate. For a short while, existence is reduced to presence, breathing, sitting, watching the last light slip away. It is not happiness, but it is relief. The Nile mirrors this mood perfectly. Its surface is now almost black, broken only by faint reflections of firelight and stars beginning to emerge overhead. It feels deeper, older, heavier. The river has seen this hour more times than anyone could count. It knows that dusk is not an ending, but a transition, a soft closing of one chapter before another begins. As the sun finally disappears, taking its color with it, Egypt slows even further. The structures of the day loosen. The strictness of schedules fades. People speak less. Listening becomes easier than talking. The air carries sounds farther now. A cough, a step, a murmur, traveling across the darkened landscape. Everything feels closer, more exposed. This is the hour that feels like a shared confession. Everyone is tired. Everyone is aware, at least briefly, of how much effort it takes to exist here. No one says it directly. They do not need to. The silence says enough. The river says nothing at all, which somehow feels appropriate. Dusk settles fully, and the last traces of light vanish from the horizon. Egypt does not rush into sleep. It lingers in this dim, quiet state, suspended between what has been done and what is yet to come. Lamps flicker, shadows dance weakly on walls. The day releases its grip, but the night has not yet claimed its authority. There is a sense, subtle but persistent, that something else is waiting. The day belonged to labor, order, and belief. This hour belongs to weariness. But Egypt knows, even if it does not say so, that the night will belong to different things entirely. The Nile continues its slow movement beside them, dark and unreadable, as if listening. Egypt does not sleep yet. Night is when everything begins to whisper. Egyptian night. Fear, stories, and the things best left unnamed. Night in Egypt does not fall gently. It arrives with weight, with intention, pressing down on the land once the last lamp flickers and the final outline of the river dissolves into darkness. This is a world without streetlights, without glowing windows, without the illusion that darkness is something decorative. When the sun disappears, visibility becomes a privilege, not a guarantee. The Nile turns invisible, present only as sound and intuition, moving somewhere nearby, unseen but unmistakably awake. Villages and cities shrink inward, their edges erased, leaving pockets of light surrounded by a vast, listening dark. People do not wander at night unless they must. Paths that felt familiar during the day become uncertain, their landmarks swallowed by shadow. Sounds travel farther now. A step echoes too clearly. A cough feels too loud. The night amplifies everything except certainty. Doors close early. Families gather closer together. The world contracts into small, defensible spaces defined by firelight and proximity. Beyond that circle, imagination takes over. This is when beliefs sharpen. During the day, gods are honored in temples, discussed politely, and compartmentalized into rituals. At night, belief becomes personal, immediate, and anxious. Spirits are thought to roam freely once darkness settles, moving between worlds with less resistance. Souls of the dead linger. Demons drift. Forces that behave politely in daylight lose their restraint. The boundary between the living and the unseen grows thin, flexible, unreliable. No one needs to be taught this. Children absorb it through silence and warning glances. Adults reinforce it by not going out unnecessarily, by lowering their voices when certain topics arise, by avoiding names that might invite attention. In Egypt, names carry power. To speak something is to acknowledge it, and acknowledgement feels dangerously close to invitation. At night, restraint is survival. Stories emerge naturally in this environment, passed quietly from one generation to the next. They are not written down. Writing gives things structure, and structure implies control. These stories prefer to remain fluid, shifting slightly with each telling, adapting to the listener. They speak of wandering spirits, of restless dead who were not properly honored, of creatures that move just outside the firelight and retreat when noticed. The details change. The warning remains the same. These tales are told not to entertain but to instruct. They teach boundaries. Do not walk alone. Do not stray from light. Do not follow unfamiliar sounds. Do not investigate what does not call your name clearly. Curiosity in these stories is rarely rewarded. It is treated as a flaw, a misunderstanding of how the world works after dark. Survival depends not on bravery, but on restraint. There is quiet irony in how much effort goes into preparing for the afterlife, while simultaneously fearing its inhabitants. The dead are honored, fed, remembered, and yet also suspected. Not all souls transition smoothly. Some linger, some resent, some forget their place. This possibility keeps the living vigilant. Respect and fear coexist comfortably, two sides of the same belief. The absence of light changes how people think. Shadows lose their edges. Shapes become suggestions. The mind fills in gaps eagerly, creatively, often pessimistically. A rustle in the reeds might be wind, or it might not. The difference matters very little once fear takes hold. What matters is response. Stay still. Stay quiet. Stay inside. In the cities, night brings a different but equally uneasy quiet. Stone walls hold darkness more tightly, creating narrow corridors of shadow where footsteps echo without explanation. Guards patrol, their presence reassuring but limited. They carry authority, not omniscience. Even officials, so confident by day, move cautiously now. Power feels smaller in the dark, less convincing. Fires burn low, lamps are shielded, oil is precious, and light attracts attention, not all of it welcome. Conversations become whispers, not because secrets are being shared, but because the night demands respect. Words feel heavier, as if they might travel farther than intended. Laughter is rare, brief, and quickly subdued. Humor exists, but it stays close to the ground. This is the hour when people tell stories to remind themselves they are not alone. Families sit together sharing familiar tales, repeating known endings. Predictability is comforting. A story that has been told many times feels safe, contained. New stories are approached carefully. Innovation is a daytime activity. At night, tradition protects. Some stories are clearly exaggerated. Others feel uncomfortably plausible. Listeners rarely challenge either. Accuracy is less important than function. These stories map danger, marking places and behaviors to avoid. They reinforce caution without requiring explanation. When someone disappears, the story adjusts, incorporating the event seamlessly. This flexibility keeps the belief system intact, responsive, alive. There is a faint, almost dry humor Embedded in the way people discuss night dangers, it surfaces in remarks like, "Nothing good happens outside after dark," or, "If it wanted you to see it, you would already be gone." These comments are delivered calmly, without dramatic flair. They acknowledge fear without surrendering to it. The joke, if there is one, lies in acceptance. The night is not fair. Pretending otherwise is foolish. Children are warned gently, firmly, not to ask too many questions after sunset. Questions imply interest. Interest implies attention. Attention is reciprocal. The safest approach is obedience and silence. Curiosity is encouraged during daylight, where answers exist and risks are visible. At night, curiosity becomes negotiation with unknown forces that do not explain their rules. Sleep itself is not guaranteed. Dreams blur into stories. Stories blur into beliefs. People wake suddenly, uncertain whether a sound came from the world or from within their own minds. This uncertainty is expected. It is part of the night's character. No one is embarrassed by fear. Everyone understands it. Fear is not weakness here. It is awareness. The Nile continues its movement through all of this, unseen but constant. Water laps against banks, reeds whisper. Somewhere something splashes and disappears. The river becomes a presence felt through vibration and sound, less defined, more ancient. At night, it feels closer to its original state, before names, before gods, before explanations. People sense this and respond with caution. As hours pass, the darkness deepens, then stabilizes. Eyes adjust. Ears learn to distinguish patterns. Not everything unfamiliar is dangerous, but not everything safe announces itself either. This ambiguity defines the night. It demands attention without offering clarity. It reveals how thin the line is between confidence and vulnerability. Eventually, fatigue overtakes fear. Bodies rest, though lightly. Sleep comes in fragments, interrupted by dreams shaped by stories and shadows. The night does not attack. It does not need to. It simply exists, pressing gently against the edges of awareness, reminding everyone how small they are without daylight's reassurance. By the time the first hint of pre-dawn light begins to soften the horizon, the night loosens its grip. What felt overwhelming hours earlier retreats quietly, leaving behind only memory and relief. People will wake and speak less about what frightened them and more about what needs to be done. The night's power fades with the dark, but its lessons remain. In the darkness, without titles, tools, or sunlight to organize the world, people reveal their truest selves. They are cautious. They are imaginative. They are aware of their limits. In the dark, stripped of control and certainty, humanity is most honest, and Egypt, listening beside the unseen river, understands this better than anyone. Fire, wine, and the conversations that were never recorded. Deep into the night, after fear has settled into something manageable and sleep has claimed most bodies, a smaller Egypt remains awake. This Egypt does not appear in official records. It does not write decrees or carve stone. It exists in the glow of low fires, in cups passed quietly from hand to hand, in voices kept just above silence. These are the people who cannot sleep, will not sleep, or are paid not to sleep. Night watchmen, guards, boatmen waiting for tides, innkeepers counting coins, and those whose thoughts refuse to rest gather in loose, temporary circles that will dissolve before dawn. Fire becomes the center of these moments, not large, confident flames, but modest ones, carefully fed, economical with light. Fire here is not for celebration. It is for presence. It confirms that someone is awake, that warmth still exists, that the dark has not completely won. Faces appear and disappear in its flicker, half lit, half concealed, which feels appropriate for conversations that are not meant to last. Wine flows sparingly, not because people lack desire, but because excess invites problems. This is not the wine of festivals or ceremonies. It is thin, practical, consumed slowly, enough to loosen the tongue, not enough to dull awareness. Night demands balance. Too sober, and thoughts spiral. Too drunk, and footsteps become careless. Most people find a careful middle ground. Talk begins casually, without intention. Someone complains about the heat that refuses to leave even after sunset. Someone else responds with a story about a worse summer, real or imagined. These are not important statements. That is why they are safe. Small talk builds trust without requiring commitment. Only after time passes does conversation drift toward things that matter. Complaints surface naturally, about work that never changes, about officials who do not listen, about gods who feel distant at inconvenient moments. These grievances are delivered without expectation of resolution. No one here believes they will fix the system tonight. The value lies in saying them aloud, in hearing someone else agree, even briefly. Shared frustration lightens the load more effectively than silence ever could. There is humor in these exchanges, dry and understated. Someone jokes that history will surely remember this moment, this cup, this complaint. Someone else replies that history barely remembers emperors correctly, let alone tired men by a fire. Laughter follows, quiet and brief. More breath than sound. It is not joy. It is release. Stories are told, but not the mythic ones, reserved for fear or instruction. These are stories of minor victories and familiar failures. A tax collector fooled, a supervisor embarrassed, a small kindness that mattered more than expected. They are shaped to entertain, to distract, to remind everyone present that life contains more than obligation. These stories will never be written down. They do not need to be. Their purpose is immediate. Night watchmen share observations in low voices. Who passed earlier? Which streets felt strange? Where shadows lingered too long? Their knowledge is practical, earned through repetition. They do not dramatize danger. They catalog it. This corner is quieter than usual. That alley smells wrong. The river sounds different tonight. These comments are accepted without argument. Experience speaks clearly at this hour. Some conversations drift toward philosophy, but gently, without ambition. Questions are raised without pressure to answer them. Why the gods allow certain things? Whether Rome will always rule? If children will have it easier or harder? These questions float in the firelight, acknowledged but unresolved. Resolution is not required. Speaking them is enough. There is a particular kind of honesty that appears late at night when no one is performing for authority or expectation. Titles loosen, roles blur. A guard speaks like a philosopher. A laborer makes a sharp observation about power. In daylight, these moments would feel inappropriate. At night, they feel natural. Darkness equalizes by obscuring status. The Nile is sometimes mentioned, usually indirectly. A comment about the water level, a remark about how it sounded earlier. The river remains present even in conversation, an unspoken participant. Everyone understands that no matter how long they talk, The Nile will still be there when they are done. This knowledge lends perspective. It makes arguments smaller, complaints softer. There is a gentle irony in how these people understand their place in history. They know they are not shaping it in obvious ways. They are not generals or governors. They are not names that will be preserved. This awareness is not bitter. It is practical. History, as they understand it, happens around them, not because of them, but conversation belongs to them entirely. Sometimes someone mentions change, a new law rumored, a different official appointed, a shift in religious mood. These topics are approached carefully with skepticism. Change is treated as something distant, unreliable. Empires change slowly and usually without asking permission. Talking about it does not stop it. Still, people talk. It makes the waiting feel less passive. Fire burns lower as hours pass. Wine cups empty and are not always refilled. Fatigue returns, gentle but persistent. Conversations thin. Gaps grow longer between words. Silence becomes comfortable again, no longer threatening. This is how the night winds down for those who stayed awake through it. Before parting, there are no grand conclusions. No plans are made. Everyone knows tomorrow will look much like today. That understanding does not require agreement. It simply exists. People rise, stretch, nod to one another, and disappear back into darkness, carrying fragments of shared talk that will fade by morning. None of these conversations will appear in official accounts. No scribe will record them. No monument will commemorate them. And yet they are as real as any decree, as necessary as any ritual. They are where people process the weight of living under systems they did not design. While they talk quietly and without expectation, the empire continues to shift in ways they cannot see. Policies change, beliefs evolve, power moves from hand to hand. The Nile flows, history advances, indifferent to the firelight and the wine. But for a brief stretch of the night, beside fading embers and familiar voices, people claim something smaller and more personal. They claim the right to speak, to complain, to laugh softly at a world they cannot control, even as it continues to change without them. Egypt in 300 AD, a civilization quietly closing. By the late hours of the night, when fires burn low and conversations have thinned into memory, Egypt exists in a state that is difficult to name. It is not collapsing, it is not rising, it is not even resisting, it is simply continuing, which, for an ancient civilization, is often how endings begin. In the year 300 AD, Egypt lives under Roman rule, a province administered, taxed, and managed with a confidence that assumes permanence. Rome believes it has inherited Egypt. Egypt knows better. It has seen inheritances before. Roman authority is visible everywhere, but rarely dramatic. Laws are enforced. Governors rotate in and out. Coins bear unfamiliar faces. Greek and Latin appear alongside older scripts. None of this feels violent. It feels administrative. Egypt has been absorbed not by force alone, but by paperwork, by schedules, by a slow redefinition of what matters. The temples still stand, the Nile still floods. Life continues. That is what makes the change easy to miss. For centuries, Egypt defined itself through continuity. Gods endured, rituals repeated, seasons returned. Now that continuity remains on the surface, but beneath it, something is thinning. Not disappearing, just wearing down. Like stone steps smoothed by countless feet, the old culture is still there, but its edges have softened. Its sharpness, once unquestioned, now feels optional. Religion illustrates this most clearly. The old gods remain honored and named, but their authority feels less exclusive. Christianity moves quietly through the population, offering a different structure of belief. It speaks of a single God, a single judgment, a promise that does not require elaborate preparation or expensive rituals. For the poor, this simplicity is appealing. For the powerful, it is unsettling. For Egypt, it is another layer added to an already crowded spiritual landscape. This new faith does not arrive as a conqueror. It arrives as a whisper, carried by merchants, soldiers, families, and the restless. It asks fewer questions about lineage and more about belief. It challenges the necessity of temples, of priesthoods, of complex afterlife economies. It does not demand the immediate destruction of the old gods. It simply offers an alternative, and alternatives have a way of eroding certainty. The old rituals continue, but attendance shifts. Some festivals feel quieter. Some offerings grow smaller. Priests still perform their duties, but they notice the difference. Faith does not vanish. It redistributes. Egypt becomes a place where beliefs overlap, sometimes comfortably, sometimes not. The result is not chaos, but dilution. Cultural confidence fades in similar ways. Egyptian identity, once central and defining, now shares space with Roman expectations. Education favors Greek texts, administration favors Roman models. Egyptian traditions survive, but increasingly as heritage rather than authority. They are respected, even admired, but less often consulted. The past becomes something to preserve, not something to obey. This transition is not mourned publicly. There are no declarations of loss. People still live, work, believe, and die. What changes is emphasis. What was once essential becomes optional. What was once unquestioned becomes symbolic. The civilization does not fall. It is slowly set aside. There is a quiet sadness in this process, though it is rarely acknowledged by those living through it. Sadness requires perspective, and perspective often arrives too late. To the people of 300 AD, life still feels full, still demanding, still meaningful. The gods answer prayers. The Nile provides. Children grow. The world from within feels stable enough. Yet from a distance the shift is unmistakable. Egypt is no longer defining itself. It is being defined. Rome sets the terms of power. New religions set the terms of belief. Old practices remain, but they increasingly require explanation. A culture that once explained the world now finds itself explained by others. This is not a violent ending. It is a polite one. The kind that happens while everyone is busy with daily survival. No single moment marks the change. There is no day when Egypt stops being ancient and starts being something else. It happens quietly, in choices made for convenience, in traditions skipped because they feel unnecessary, in languages learned because they are useful. The irony is sharp but gentle. Egypt, which taught the world how to remember, begins to be remembered instead of consulted. Its monuments endure, but their meanings shift. They become objects of curiosity rather than centers of power. Tourists of the future will marvel at them without fully understanding the lives that built them. People living through this moment do not feel forgotten. They feel normal. They complain about taxes. They worry about floods. They prepare for death. They tell stories. The machinery of life continues to turn. Civilization does not announce when it is closing a chapter. It simply moves on to the next page, leaving the old one behind without ceremony. Rome, too, believes in its own permanence. It records Egypt as a province, a resource, a stable acquisition. It does not notice that Egypt has outlasted every power that claimed it. Rome sees history as a line moving forward. Egypt sees it as a river, looping, returning, erasing. As dawn approaches, the Nile remains unchanged, flowing steadily through fields, past cities, alongside temples both old and newly neglected. It has witnessed this pattern before. Cultures do not vanish. They fade, layer by layer, until they become foundations for something else. The river remembers every version. There is something deeply human about this kind of ending. It lacks drama, it lacks finality, it feels unresolved, but unresolved does not mean incomplete. Egypt's influence does not end here. It disperses. It seeps into language, belief, architecture, and memory. It becomes invisible precisely because it becomes everywhere. By 300 AD, Egypt is no longer the center of its own story. That role has passed quietly to others. What remains is continuity without dominance, survival without command. A civilization that once shaped the world now allows itself to be shaped. And yet, for all this quiet closure, nothing feels finished. The temples still cast shadows. The gods still receive prayers. The people still wake, work, eat, fear, hope. The night still deepens and loosens its grip before dawn. History moves on, unaware of the moment it left something behind. Egypt does not collapse into ruin. It simply becomes background. A presence felt rather than heard. A foundation disguised as scenery. People forget without meaning to. Generations pass without noticing what has been lost. But the Nile does not forget. It continues to flow past forgotten shrines and reused stones, carrying silt, memory, and the long understanding that everything humans build eventually becomes something they remember imperfectly. Empires pass, beliefs shift, names fade. The river keeps moving, holding the shape of every civilization that ever depended on it, whether they still remember or not. A new dawn, the same river, and passing humans. Morning returns to Egypt without ceremony. It does not announce itself as a conclusion or a beginning. It simply arrives, pale light spreading slowly across the Nile as it has done for longer than memory can measure. The darkness of night loosens its grip, retreating quietly, leaving behind only the faint residue of dreams and unease. Birds test the air again. The first movements of the day stir along the riverbanks. Another cycle begins. Not because anyone planned it, but because continuation is the default state of things. The Nile looks much the same as it did yesterday. It always does. Its surface catches the early light with practiced indifference, reflecting the sky without comment. Mist rises again, thin and patient, softening edges, hiding details that will soon become unavoidable. The river has not changed overnight. It has no reason to. It flows now as it did when pharaohs were young ideas and empires were still rehearsing their ambitions. Water moves northward carrying silt, memory, and the quiet assurance that nothing here depends entirely on human attention. People wake and return to motion. Farmers step back into fields. Officials prepare to resume their routines. Priests adjust rituals. Children stretch and complain and learn, once again, what the day expects of them. Faces differ from those of centuries past. Clothes change, languages shift, but the pattern remains familiar. Wake, work, endure, rest, repeat. From a distance, individual lives blur into rhythm. From close up, each one feels urgent and singular. This is the strange comfort of continuity. Humans believe themselves to be living in unique moments, and they are right in the smallest possible sense. No two mornings are identical. No two lives repeat exactly. Yet when placed against the river's patience, difference feels modest. The Nile has seen people wake with hope, with fear, with confidence, with resignation. It has seen them invent reasons to believe this day will be different. It has also seen how often it is not. Egypt in 300 AD moves forward without knowing it is nearing a threshold. People do not sense themselves standing at the edge of an era. They feel only the familiar pressure of necessity. New beliefs spread quietly. Old ones adapt or retreat. Authority shifts its language. Culture reshapes itself subtly, almost politely. From inside the moment, this feels like normal life. From outside, it will eventually be called transition. The river does not participate in this naming. It does not label phases or mark eras. It does not distinguish between golden ages and quiet endings. It simply witnesses. It watches temples rise and lose relevance. It watches cities expand and hollow out. It watches gods gain followers and lose them. It absorbs fragments of every story without preference, carrying them forward in its current, dissolving sharp edges into sediment. People along its banks continue to believe they matter deeply to the river. They speak of controlling it, honoring it, mastering it. They build walls, dig channels, measure levels, and feel reassured by numbers that suggest understanding. The Nile allows this belief. It has learned that humans need to feel central to survive their own awareness. It does not correct them. Correction would require effort. As the sun climbs higher, morning becomes day again. Activity increases. Sound returns. The quiet reflections of dawn are replaced by practical concerns. Food must be secured. Work must be done. Conversations resume where they left off. Whatever fears or thoughts lingered from the night are folded away, saved for later hours. The living have little time for reflection when survival demands attention. And yet, something lingers beneath the movement. A sense that all of this, however urgent it feels, is temporary. That civilizations, like days, have rhythms. That beginnings and endings are less dramatic than people imagine. Egypt does not fall apart. It continues until it becomes something else, its old shape visible only in outlines, in habits, in stories that no longer require explanation. Future generations will look back and impose structure on this moment. They will draw lines, name causes, assign significance. They will say this was the late period, the decline, the transition. They will analyze beliefs, power shifts, economic changes. All of that will be accurate in its way. It will also miss something essential. From within, life does not feel like decline. It feels like living. The people of this morning do not think of themselves as the last of anything. They are simply the next. They inherit customs without questioning their origin. They adapt when adaptation becomes necessary. They forget slowly, unintentionally, as attention shifts elsewhere. Forgetting is rarely deliberate. It happens because remembering requires effort, and effort is already spent. The Nile continues to flow past them all, steady and unreadable. It has outlived every version of Egypt that has existed so far, and it will outlive many more. It has seen humanity at its most confident and its most afraid. It has seen humans build meaning, defend it, abandon it, and rebuild something similar with different names. It recognizes the pattern, even if people do not. There is a quiet irony in how much humans struggle to be remembered by a river that remembers everything without caring. Monuments are built to last forever. Names are carved into stone. Stories are told and retold. Eventually, stone erodes. Names blur. Stories become fragments. The river carries the remains of these efforts forward, reducing them to material, to texture, to ground. As the day advances, Egypt resumes its familiar rhythm. Life along the Nile continues, not because it must be preserved, but because it is easier to continue than to stop. This has always been true. The river rewards persistence more than innovation. Those who adapt survive. Those who insist on permanence become ruins. History, when it looks back, will not shout about this moment. It will not frame it as a dramatic turning point. It will whisper instead, quietly noting changes that seemed insignificant at the time. That whisper is easy to miss, especially during the noise of living. It is heard best late at night, when movement slows and attention drifts. This is the nature of historical endings. They do not announce themselves. They arrive disguised as routine. People wake, work, and sleep, unaware that something essential has already shifted. Only later does the pattern reveal itself. The Nile does not need hindsight. It experiences all moments equally. Dawn and dusk, rise and fall, belief and forgetting all pass before it with the same unhurried indifference. It does not grieve for what is lost. It does not celebrate what endures. It flows. And so the story closes where it began, with the river moving steadily through time, carrying reflections of sky, fragments of civilization, and the quiet understanding that humans are temporary guests along its banks. Lives pass. Empires pass. Even memories pass, reshaped by those who inherit them. History does not scream its lessons. It does not demand attention. It waits patiently for moments of quiet when defenses are low and minds are open. It speaks softly, almost kindly, reminding those who listen that they are part of a pattern far larger than themselves. The Nile keeps flowing, and if you listen carefully, when the world grows quiet and the day finally releases its grip, you might hear it moving through the dark, carrying the echoes of countless mornings, countless lives, and the simple truth that it has already seen all of us passing by.